So I decided, because I recently played every mainline Pokemon game, why not throw a list together? I have this YouTube channel, may as well throw something on it. This is easy content. It's fairly easy listening, so if you want to just put it on as a podcast, go right ahead. It's also going to be a fairly long one because while there's only 9 generations of Pokemon games, and I'm not going to count all of the little spin-off games like Colosseum, this is still going to take a minute. This is going to take a while. So starting at the top, we got Pokemon Red and Green, Red and Blue, and Yellow. I'm going to put all of them together, and I'm going to put them all in C tier because they are the OGs. And while they're not games I would ever replay again, there's a lot of foundational work on this. There's the first 15 types in the game, all right here. There's 150 Pokemon, 151 if you count Mew, which outside of Japan, I don't know if anyone ever got a Mew legitly. They're solid for what they are, which was a Game Boy original RPG. It took 6 years to develop. It's got a lot of crazy history, and while it's not my first Pokemon game, it is the first Pokemon game. It's glitchy, imbalanced beyond belief. The Psychic type is just way OP in that game. The stats were not terribly well thought out, speed increased your crit chance, and special defense and special attack were one stat called special, which led to Pokemon like Alakazam just running away with the game because they were incredibly fast. They had incredibly high special for their attacks. That's why they had it. But because they were also special defense, it was also way bulkier than it needed to be, making what should be a fast glass cannon type of archetype is just the best Pokemon all around. It didn't help that one of its counters was Ghost, and there's only one line of Ghost in the game, and they're part poison, which is weak to Psychic, and there was a glitch that made Psychic immune to Ghost. So, Jesus, it's not a balanced game. It's not a game I would easily go back to. I might one day, out of boredom or nostalgia or curiosity, go back to it, but they're not games that I would recommend to anybody who didn't grow up with them. There's not just better Pokemon games, there's better Kanto games, because that's the region that the game takes place in. I will say, as a benefit, spoiler warning, I love story. I'm okay with wordy JRPG, friendship is magic kind of, storytelling. So I'm okay with Pokemon stories. They're for children, it's campy, it's fun. This game doesn't have much of a story. You just get dropped off, you're a kid, go on your adventure, beat everybody. That's a strength and that's a weakness to the game. There's not a huge hook other than the gimmick of collecting Pokemon, which were at that point monsters, full-on monsters. Things like Muck existed out in the world. They seem to be pollution run amok. It's even called Muck. Yeah, they're it's fun. It's a staple. It launched a franchise. C is as high as I can put it. That's not nostalgia. That's just respect for you launched something incredible with a small team. And who would have thought? Next up is Silver, Gold, and Crystal. And Gen 2. Gen 2 is the first gen I played. It was pivotal. It was pivotal to the series. I'm going to put it just ahead of Gen 1. And Crystal, I'm going to put in B. And I'll get into that in a sec. So, Gen 2 did a lot of things. It fixed a lot of the glitches that Gen 1 had. And Gen 1 started off really glitchy with Red and Green. And in the international Red and Blue, it got a little bit better. And Yellow there's like better sprite work. They fixed some of the bugs and glitches. They rebalanced everything. Like some of the gym challenge fights are much harder later on and easier earlier on. Like it's they really kind of perfected Kanto. They really perfected Kanto in that first gen as it went on, and it went on for forever. I mean, 4 games. With Gen 2 and Johto, they fixed the stuff that was left over, and they started rebalancing. They added 2 new types. They added Steel and Dark, making us now up to 17 typings. They split up the special attack and special defense into their own respective categories, creating a overall nerf to Pokemon like Alakazam, but really it's a buff to most everything else. What else did they do? They had the day and night cycle. The day and night cycle was really cool. You set your clock and it changed in real time. That's a blessing and a curse. It was very, as a kid, it was very cool to be able to like wake up in the morning and play the game, and it's also morning in the game and all that. You know, it was nice. It was nice Nintendo gimmick, you know? The problem came with the fact that everything was in real time. Certain trainers would attack only at night, like all the police trainers would only attack you at night. And they had events that happened every day. Like there was a daily event, like Lapras was catchable only as a static encounter on like Fridays or Saturdays, and there was bug catching contests that happened only during the day, and it was like on Tuesdays and Thursdays or something. Like, part of that is cool and it's immersive, and another part of that is just frustration because you're waiting in actual real life sometimes a week to get that Pokemon you wanted to get, or to go out and try to catch a Scyther. And I feel like that kind of stuff isn't worth it. Like, not really. And of course, like, there's nothing stopping you from, especially nowadays, and especially on emulation, to just change the calendar day, and you can do whatever you want, whenever you want. But you shouldn't have to go outside of the game and change the time, or change the time in a menu to do the things that you want to do in a game. So I don't know, that kind of like struck me the wrong way. This is also the generation that created friendship and brought in breeding. The big gimmick for Generation 2 was baby Pokemon, which are absolutely useless but kind of cute Pokemon. And I mean, there's so much. Gen 2 did so much better than Gen 1, and it was the gen that I started with. It's as low as it is because some of the things that it didn't do well was scaling. Like, I think once you hit, what was it, like Ecruteak City, I think the game opens up and you're no longer on like a linear path. Yeah, I think it's Ecruteak. Once you hit that, you can go and you can do like one of like 3 gyms at the same time, and that's cool. That's like really cool. And the map is made in like a way that it doubles back on itself a lot, like a Metroidvania would. And that's also really cool. But the scaling, because of this, is so bad. Like, once you hit a point where trainers and wild Pokemon are approaching the like level 30 level, that's kind of the rest of your game. So all of a sudden, the game goes from being somewhat challenging or fun to stale, and all of your Pokemon are just like taking forever to level up, which itself wouldn't be a problem if the entire game was built with that in mind, but it's not. The late game is, you know, obviously the Elite Four and Indigo Plateau from the first game, and you go and you do that, those guys are in their 50s and 60s. And your Pokemon probably aren't. There's like this spike of difficulty because it's just poorly thought out for like level scaling. But in the scheme of things, this isn't enough to like knock it down into anything lower than, Gen 1. It is a easy better game than Gen 1 games. And Crystal is even better because it allowed you to customize your character. You can now play as a boy or a girl. It's bizarre it took this many games for that to be a thing, but I mean, the 90s. It also had a story that focused more on the legendary beasts. You got more lore with the different legendary Pokemon. You had to chase down Suicune, which now went from like a roaming encounter, which is the worst kind of legendary in the series, to a more static one that you had to follow throughout the game. It's just a really solid improvement on Gen 2. Now we get to Ruby and Sapphire, and I'm gonna save Emerald for a minute because I think that deserves to be categorized just a little bit different than Ruby and Sapphire. Ruby and Sapphire, this is going to be my first majorly controversial choice. I'm gonna put in D tier, and I'm sorry, fans of Ruby and Sapphire. I swear to you, I have a reason for why I'm doing that. Hoenn games have a special spot in a lot of people. We had a console generation jump. We went from the Game Boy to the Game Boy Advance. Graphically, this meant that Pokemon had a look and a style that was much better than anything they'd had before. Like, the style of Pokemon was like developed in this gen. It finally like clicked. This gen also had abilities added. Abilities are like passives that every Pokemon has. And adding abilities to this game increased the depth and the replayability so much more. And it's like a foundational building block to not just modern Pokemon and not just like modern competitive Pokemon, but just like of the series changing and evolving. And if I'm looking at like the first 3 gens, it's Gen 3 that really became the first good game, not the first good Pokemon game or the first Pokemon game. This is the first good Pokemon game. And how can I say that and put them lower than everything else? Well, I'm gonna jump ahead a little bit and put Emerald in A tier because Emerald did everything Ruby and Sapphire did, which was like the abilities, the double battles, it introduced the Battle Frontier, which is post game, and this is fantastic for people who want to play just a ton of Pokemon battling and challenges. Like this is the game for Gen 3. Ruby and Sapphire, the differences between them, like Emerald, it had both teams, because when you play Ruby, you have Team Magma, and when you play Sapphire, you have Team Aqua. Those are the bad guys for that game. The other team will show up as a cameo, I believe. It's been a while. But it's just those. Emerald put both teams together. Emerald gave both teams their own unique hideout. Emerald increased the story with the legendary Pokemons Groudon and Kyogre, and introduced Rayquaza. The moment at Sootopolis where you have your first like in-game cutscene for the series is amazing, and it's good storytelling. Ruby and Sapphire are like unfinished games that are only released because of the tradition of having 2 games release. Emerald is the finished game. Emerald is better than everything that came before it. If you wanted to play the original Hoenn games, Emerald is the game that you play. What else did it do? It introduced weather. All 3 games introduced weather. At that point, I believe weather lasted forever too, so if you used Rain Dance, it just rained forever. These are good games. These are good games. And I'm sorry for fans of Ruby and Sapphire. I hope you understand. There's just no reason to play them. And even Like, I'd stopped playing Pokemon. My first game was Gen 2. I played all the Gen 2 games. I had all three of them. And we had the Gen 1 games. And I never got the Game Boy Advanced. I grew up a bit. I stopped playing Pokemon. And I didn't get to play Gen 3 when it released. So I have no nostalgia for Ruby and Sapphire. They're just easily beaten by Emerald. And I don't like the story. Like, the story in Gen 1 and 2 doesn't exist much. Gen 3 has a story, and it's nonsense. And Emerald took that nonsense story and made the best it could out of it. Emerald is easily the best game for Gen 3, and it's so far the best game in the series. But then we get to, no, not Sinnoh. We get to Fire Red and Leaf Green. These are remakes to the original games, which it might seem a little early to do remakes, but at this point there was no way to transfer Game Boy Pokemon to Game Boy Advance, so Red and or Fire Red and Leaf Green, they were a way to bring some of these 150 first Pokemon up into the next gen and into the Game Boy Advance. Also, they're games that, while good, they're games that are very, very broken, very antiquated, even at that time. So this update was like really necessary. I'm going to put them in B. They're fun. I've played them. I've played them less than I have Gen 1. That's because I played a lot of Gen 1 when I was a kid. As long as these exist and you can get them or you can emulate them, there's really no reason for anyone to play the original 3 games ever. They use all the stuff from Gens 2 and 3. So we have breeding, we have abilities, we have a deeper move pool, we have steel and dark types. There's some problems, like there's some Pokemon that got evolutions in Gen 2 and Gen 3, and they can't evolve. They're stuck in their Gen 1 game days. Like, we're pretending like nothing outside of this gen exists, so that's weird. They added the Sevi Islands, which you visit in the main story and then you visit in the post game, and I really don't like the Sevi Islands. I feel like they're just poorly made, they're poorly implemented, they're not fun, nothing about it's good. That's not true. I kind of like the Hypno bit and the girl, because that was like really off-putting, you know. And they're good games. They're games I would play over the other ones. Like I said, they're just fine. And bizarrely, this isn't the last time we'll be in Kanto, because we've already been in Kanto like 3 times. This is our 3rd time in Kanto. Now we're on to Diamond and Pearl for Gen 4, and those are the first F-tier games. And I'm going to explain why they're F-tier right now. They're very slow. They are ponderously slow. Not just in like your movement speed, not just in like that famous video of like Blissey taking forever to die. They're slow in the fact that if you get into a fight, it takes forever until you can pick anything. When you go through a menu, it takes forever for the menu to move. Everything about this takes forever. Making matters worse, when I was telling you about how Gen 3 had a nonsense plot, Gen 4 barely has a plot. Team Galactic were not well fleshed out in Diamond and Pearl. Cyrus, the leader of it, doesn't even have a name like the first 2 or 3 times you meet him. He only gets a name like at the finale. You don't ever get like a true understanding of what they're after. They're just kind of clowns, which worked fine for Team Rocket in Gen 1 and 2 because they're just like a criminal organization. They're just a mob. Didn't work so well in Diamond and Pearl. I know this is petty, but Palkia and Dialga, I don't like their designs. They don't look good. And I'm not one to really hate on like Pokemon designs. because I know a lot of people are like later ones. They don't even look like Pokemon. They look like Digimon and all that garbage. I don't care. I know this is a series for children. I know that very talented people have put a lot of time and effort into this. I know that over, 25 years or more, there's been over 1,000 Pokemon, and the fact that, by and large, you can look at a Pokemon and go, that's a Pokemon, is kind of a feat. This is a lot of monsters, and they look great. They look great. So, you may have noticed, we have Platinum. Platinum is not F tier. And all the good things I have to say about Gen 4, I'm going to say instead about Platinum, because Platinum fixed the problems I had with Gen 4. It fixed Team Galactic. They actually have like a point. It fixed Cyrus. He's an actual character. He gets more lines of dialogue. They extended out like Cynthia, the league champion, so she has like a character. Like, there's a lot of really solid work done in this. Yeah, it's not an F tier, it's our first S tier. This is the pinnacle of the first 4 gens. Easily. This is the physical special split generation. Previously, Pokemon were very hampered by the fact that there's 2 types of attack. There's a special and a physical attack. And prior to Gen 4, that was determined by what type the Pokemon move was. So like water was always a special attack. Gyarados is like the poster boy for explaining this, and I'm going to use that for an example. Gyarados has a monstrous attack stat. He is a physical attacker. As a water type, all of his water moves that he could do in the first 3 gens counted on his weaker special attack to determine its damage. That meant that his actual potential was being limited in every single appearance up until Gen 4. When they split up physical and special and made moves now determined by context. So like, Waterfall is a physical attack that's a water attack. So it is really good on Gyarados, whereas Surf, which is a fantastic attack, is a special attack and is not as good on Gyarados as it would be on someone like Blastoise or something. Physical special is right up there with like the addition of abilities. It's the game series evolving in the right direction. Whereas I feel like that 3rd gen, especially Emerald, is like a massive step in quality. Platinum is an even bigger step in quality. This is the first time that the story is good in a Pokemon game, and not just absent like in Red and Blue, which is a strength for what Red and Blue, because it's the reason you're playing is the gameplay. Gen 4 added back the time of day changes that were in Gen 2. That was just a gimmick in Gen 2 because Gen 3 dropped it entirely. It's back in Gen 4. They increased the amount of abilities that different Pokemon could have. Like, it's solid. There's also the additions of the distortion world, so that the finale for Diamond and Pearl has changed, and that has you go into like the first like 3D area in Pokemon to go find and fight Giratina and stop Cyrus from destroying the entire world. Like, this is also the point when Pokemon became spiritual. Like if I can be like a little out there for a minute. Gen 1, Pokemon were monsters. Some of them were augmented by mankind, some of them were made by mankind, some of them were nuisances, some of them could live in peace, a lot of them were just stand-ins for like actual animals. The Voltorb line is lazy on one hand because it's just a Pokeball, but on the other it feels like the fantasy cliche of like a mimic. Like, they're monsters. And Gen 2, brought in some lore, especially with like the Burn Tower and Lugia and Ho-Ho and all those stuff. They expanded upon legendary Pokemon, because prior to this, legendary Pokemon were the three birds, which had no backstory. They're just legendary because they have high stats, and there's one of them in the game. That doesn't make them much different than Snorlax, other than, the stats are a little worse for Snorlax, but I would argue Snorlax is a much better Pokemon in Gen 1. And then there's Mewtwo, of course, who is like Pokemon Sephiroth. He exists entirely in a few like diaries you can read on Cinnabar Island, and then in the post-game. Legendary Pokemon and lore changed in Gen 2. Gen 3, however, focusing on, Groudon, Kyogre, and Rayquaza, Pokemon became forces of nature. And I feel like that was the turning point for the series in how they view Pokemon. They're forces of nature. They're the things that created the land. They're the things that created the sea. They rule over the sky, and they protect the environment. That's a pretty big change, and Gen 4 continued that probably further than most people were comfortable with at the time. I didn't play at the time, so I don't know how people felt. But the idea that you could catch not just like a Pokemon god, but in the lore, God, the creator of the universe. And the creator of the universe created Palkia and Dialga and gave them time and space. And then there's a third one who's like literally the devil. His name is Garatina, and he controls like this false mirror world of dark space and dark energy. That's weird. That's incredibly weird. And I dig it. I dig it a lot. I dug the lore of Sinnoh. I love Sinnoh. This is a good game. I'm moving on. We're going to talk about Heart Gold and Soul Silver, which were remakes of Gens 2. There's pieces of Crystal in this, so yay. This is also a game that that had evolutions, like Crobat. You can finally get in the game. You didn't have to wait until you beat the game, like in Fire Red and Leaf Green, to get evolutions that came out after the game came out. They're high B. I think they're high B. They're probably the most content-rich games in the series, because they have everything that Gen 2 had. They had like the Battle Frontier from Emerald in it. They had like mini games and the increased Safari Zone, and one that you owned and that you can build and everything. There's a lot, and I feel like it's bloated. Like if you only got to play one DS Pokemon game, this had everything you would ever want, and that's admirable. But there's a lot in there that I feel like is bloat, like the Safari Zone, which you needed real-time days to build up, to change stuff. It's really complicated and for no good reason, but you had like Pokemon that would follow you in the overworld, which was like a huge step in the right direction, especially for you to like care about these Pokemon. That said, some of the problems that Gen 2 had, like that point after Ekritique where everything kind of becomes stale and level 30 forever, that's still in this game. Like, all these years later, using Gen 4 graphics and tech, which means also you have the physical special split. They're good. They're good. I know they're a lot of people's favorite. I know it probably made somebody mad by putting them in B tier. They're just not for me. They take forever. I like some of the changes. Fighting Red in this game, which you fight Red at the end of, the Gen 2 games, is fun. It's probably more fun than it was before because it's just more complex of a game than it used to be. I just can't bring it up any higher. And personally, that's just not my favorite games. I wouldn't ever replay Gen 2 because they exist. Like, if the choice was to play a game before the physical special split or one after, I'm always going to go for the one after. It just feels like a more complete, more sensical game than without it. So it's better than those. It's still on the lower end for me. Then we get to Black and White, Gen 5. Gen 5 was hated when it came out, in part because they dropped every Pokemon from Gens 1 and 4. You couldn't use them until post-game. And that upset a whole lot of people, especially if you like look around like YouTube videos and like forum posts from the time period. People were furious about this. I, of course, came in and played the game much after all of that had ended, after people were done complaining that, you know, trash bags and ice cream cones don't look like Pokemon. After all of that controversy, and I'm here to tell you, S tier. Black and White are some of the finest Pokemon video games ever made. There's a lot of mechanical reasons for that. Like, they increased the amount of new moves. They added hidden abilities, which were impossible to get, to be honest, in Black and White. I know they originate in Black and White, but you had to use like the Dream World or something to get it, and that's all miserable. But this had like triple battles, rotation battles. It changed like how TMs are used. TMs were these one-time use items that gave your Pokemon a specific move. Now they're not one-time use, which completely changes TMs for the better. The next couple of generations have unlimited use TMs. I don't understand why we ever moved away from that. That is the correct way to get TMs. It makes them actual rewards, and you can play with them on multiple Pokemon, and you're not punished. Because you were like, oh, I love this Pidgeotto, and you give it like, I don't know, return. And you're like, yay! And then you hate Pidgeotto later because you're like, I found a better Pokemon, and now you've wasted return, which is like a really good TM. So, yeah. Mechanically, it's an evolution, of course, from everything else. I love the look of the region. I don't think Gen 5 looks better than Gen 4. Or Gen 3, because Gen 3 and Gen 4 look fantastic. They're gorgeous games. Gen 5 is a prettier game in the fact that it's more complicated. There's more 3D elements. There's more camera movements. There's that moment when you're crossing the bridge into Castelia City that is like Pokemon has arrived into the 3D world. All that's good, but I don't think it looks better than Gen 4 or 3. But the sprite work is gorgeous on the Pokemon. They all move, especially in the sequels, which we're about to get to, Black and White 2. So many sprites move and breathe and live in a way that even the 3D games have struggled historically to convey. But they're not higher because they're just Gen 4 with more complicated graphics and a few changes to the gameplay and rotation battles. No. They're so high because this is the first Pokemon game, like if you played them from the beginning to this, where the rivals are actual characters who go through a character journey. It is the only game where the evil team is sympathetic enough early on. When you first meet Team Plasma, they seem to be like a PETA group. Like they're complaining about Pokemon liberation and how the people in the universe use them as slaves, and that's all very... It raises questions. It raises questions that, like, even as a kid, you joked about. Because I'm a Gen 2 and 1 kid. We joked about these things. And as you grow older, you hear this more and more often. Where people are like, oh, Pokemon, it's a dogfighting game. And yeah, there's always been a disconnect between, like, narratively, they're your friends and you're supposed to love them and take care of them and they love you, and mechanically, you're putting them into death matches. So, it took 5 generations, but they started to comment on it. And when you're playing the game, and Team Plasma is telling, people, like, throw away your Pokeballs and let your Pokemon be free and everything, part of you is going, but they're right? Like, if you cared, if they are your friends, throw away the slavery chains that you're using to have these dog fights with these sentient beings, because not only are Pokemon sometimes literally God, they most definitely are sentient beings with, like, thoughts and feelings, and they love and they communicate. Like, the more you think about it, the more the situation gets. And here's Team Plasma commenting on it. The thing is, spoilers to an ancient game, Team Plasma is full of shit. Team Plasma, their leader is Getsus, and he is a charismatic con man. He's running them kind of like a cult, and he is using an argument that people can be sympathetic towards to obtain higher power. And he's also using a character named In, who is one of the rivals. I'm going to consider him a rival instead of, like, an antagonist, because you fight him multiple times, and even though he is part of Team Plasma, you don't know it at first, and in the end, he's no longer a part of Team Plasma. I consider him to just be one of the rivals. There's 3 rivals in the game. In is being held up by Team Plasma as being, like, the king that they're going to establish because he was, like, raised by Pokemon and he can speak their language, and he's just a very fortunate, like, figurehead for Getsus to get more and more power. I really enjoyed this story because it raised questions. It had characters go through actual arcs. The rivals are Charon and Bianca and N. All 3 start at one position. All 3 of them end up in completely different directions than where they started. They have setbacks. They change. Is this, like, amazing for video games? God, no. Video games can tell amazing stories. Video games can tell stories that can move you to tears or joy. Like, video games are an art form. These games aren't video game Citizen Kane, but they might be Pokemon Citizen Kane. So, for story alone and fun gameplay, and you know what? It took balls to just drop, like, Charizard and Pikachu. Yeah, these are S tier. They're right up there with Platinum. If you ever got to play just one Pokemon game, I would suggest Platinum. If you wanted 2, though, it would be Platinum and Black and White. So then we get to Black and White 2. Unlike previous generations, we didn't get a this is that game but better or finished like with Emerald and Platinum. We get an actual sequel to the Black and White game. It takes place like 2-3 years later. You have a new protagonist, but you get to see what happened to everybody, and you got to see what happened to Unova. I think these are A tier. And I'm going to tell you why. Mechanically, it's better than Black and White. There's some streamlining. You have a better variety of Pokemon because they added in, like, Pokemon from the other generations are now available to catch, so your team builds can be much more diverse than they were in Black and White. Some of the challenge is actually incredible. Charon, who was your rival in Black and White, he's the first gym fight in Black and White 2. He will actually lay you out if you are not prepared for him. And there hasn't been like a gen with a gym fight right at the beginning that can really lay you out since like the first one. If you had like Charmander and you walked in, no, not even then, because I don't think Geodude and Onyx knew any rock moves to take out Charmander in Gen 1. So yeah, this is one where you didn't have like a special weakness to because he's a normal fighter and nothing is weak to normal. It's just he had a really solid team that if you didn't have a plan for would just destroy you. It's also just like fun to go through Unova from a different direction. They start you off like on the other end of Unova. You never even go to like the original hometown in the regular game. During your playthrough, you have to beat the game, become champion, and then open up the rest of the map that you can go to like the early parts of the first game. There's work done with like the rival. I think his name was Hugh in Black and White 2. Hugh is fine. He's better than a lot of the rivals that we've had, but his whole thing was like he couldn't protect his sister when in the first Black and White game, Team Plasma took her Pokemon, and her Pokemon was taken. He spent a few years doing his whole anime training arc, and he's going to become the best fighter possible so that he can save his little sister's Pokemon and bring it back. And that's, you don't know that at first. He just seems like another like angry, hot-headed like rival like we've had a few times. Once you find out that about him and what his motivation is, he becomes sympathetic and he becomes a little bit more two-dimensional. I think Charon, Bianca, and N became three-dimensional much quicker and they had a better hook early on for you to care about them than Hugh did. I will say the resolution to Hugh's storyline is kind of interesting. Pokemon rivals don't really have much story to them. I mean, Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald had two rivals. They had Brendan and May, who disappear after like the 5th or 6th gym. Like you beat them one last time, and they just disappear from the game. No mention, no appearance ever again. They're forgotten about by their own game. They get no resolution. And the other rival in those games is Wally. He's a kid that you help catch a Routes. You beat him with his Routes that only knows like Growl or something. And then he disappears for like 15, 20 hours of gameplay. And then he shows up and is like, I want to fight you. And you're like, wait, who are you? Like, Pokemon rivals don't genuinely get much in resolution. The most resolved ending we ever got was like probably Blue, because he became champion for 10 seconds before we showed up and beat him. That changes with Hugh, because Hugh does get his sister's Pokemon, but it's evolved into like a Purloin, and it has no like memory of his sister, and it's changed its personality, and it's been like abused by Team Plasma, and he takes it home where it doesn't feel welcome, and he talks about how it's going to take some work to try to get it used to his sister again. And that's kind of poignant in this series. There's no happy ending. Like, they get the Pokemon back, but it's like an abused pet. It's like got PTSD. It's changed its entire personality and its appearance. And they still love it and they're willing to help it, but it might not ever be what it was before. In fact, it physically and emotionally will never be what it was before. Does the game like dwell on this? No, because it's for kids and it's still light, but it's still like one of those things where when I played it and I got to that point and they got the cat and the cat had changed, I was just like, that's sad. That's sad in a way that these games are not usually sad, and it was a very understated sad, because Hugh's personality isn't one to dwell on these things. He's a man of, I gotta do action because I was inactive once and it hurt, a family member. Very melodramatic. And that's all good. That's all good, but why is it lower, right? Why is it lower? If mechanically it's better, if the Pokemon variety is better, if I'm talking this much about a rival, even though I said that the other rivals were better, what is holding this back? It's the story. It's fun to see some remnants of Team Plasma, to see like what happened to like Rude. He was one of the 7 sages of Team Plasma. And it's interesting to see like the ramifications of certain things. It's interesting to see like how characters have changed and evolved since we last saw them. All of that is interesting. There's a way on the Nintendo DS to see like the backstory for characters with these flashbacks by using a save from Black and White to see more. There's ways to see this also on emulation if you're going to do it through the emulation route. These moments are poignant. These moments are great. They further deepen the characters and they further enhance Black and White. But outside of those moments, and outside of that kind of hook of figuring out what happened after these games, the story is kind of dull until like you've beaten 7 gyms. Like, there's no major change for anything in the story until you've defeated the Dragon Gym Leader. And once you've done that, the plot happens, and it just happens all at once. It doesn't come out of complete nowhere. You've seen Zinzalin a few times, and he's like the new leader for the game for Team Plasma. And you've seen Colress a few times. You even fought him a few times, and he seems to be like this cold analytical guy, and you don't know exactly what his deal is. So all of that's set up before that point, but every major story beat happens after like the 7th gym. They have like Team Plasma has a pirate ship that can fly because anime, and I swear to you, you invade that ship like 3 times over the course of like 2 gyms. Like twice in a row you invade that ship. Once you just get kicked off of it, and the second time it sticks. Like, there's no need for all of it to be backloaded that much. It was a fine story. I wish the pacing was better. I feel like the pacing for Black and White is a lot better than Black and White 2, even though Black and White 2 kind of supports a lot of things for Black and White. God, thinking on it, maybe I put them into S tier 2, because everything else is better in Black and White 2. Everything else. The story is a side note, and I feel like there's a lot of like fans of the game that don't really care about the story. So having the story be a side note for so long and then just be narrative dumped, I don't think anyone enjoyed that. I don't think there's anyone who could possibly enjoy the fact that almost everything involving Kyogre and Getsus and everything happens all in one big dump. So I don't know. I'm gonna keep them in A for right now. I do love Black and White though. All right, X and Y. We gotta move on. X and Y. The first games that brought us straight into 3D. This is also the game that gave us our final so far typing. They added the fairy type, which was actually kind of needed. Dragons became a bit overpowered, a bit unmatched. Their biggest weakness, of course, being other dragons, which meant whoever won the speed tie tended to knock the other dragon out. And Ice. And Ice is just not a great typing, and they could either buff up Ice to become a better, viable typing, or, you know what, invent Fairy. And I don't think they were wrong to invent the Fairy type as a hard counter to Dragon, because they're immune to Dragon, and they do double damage to Dragon. And they have some really disgustingly powerful moves to hit Dragons with. The reason why I like introducing Fairy over like buffing Ice is it allowed Poison, which was a typing that doesn't have a whole lot of like play, to now have play, because Fairy is weak to Poison. And Fairy is also weak to Steel, and Steel, while it's been around since Gen 2, they're a defensive type. They're not really an offensive type. And having stuff like Iron Head, which is a really great Steel move, do double damage to something as potent as Fairy, it really kind of elevated Poison and Steel, while at the same time allowing a counter to Dragon, which was a bit OP. The other major thing that X and Y added, of course, was Mega Evolutions. Mega Evolutions they're probably the gimmick. When people are thinking about Pokemon gimmicks, they're probably not thinking of stuff like friendship. Friendship was a gimmick in Gen 2, and it's kind of hung around forever, because like really successful gimmicks stick forever. The day and night cycle, it changes a bit as it goes, but it sticks. But when people are thinking of gimmicks, they're thinking of the Mega Evolutions, and they started here. The thing is, I'm gonna put X and Y in the D tier. And I have reasons. I do like the fairy type. I do like Mega Evolutions. In concept, I feel like in practice, Mega Evolutions were flawed. For one, there was only a handful of Pokemon that had Mega Evolutions. Only a smaller percentage of those were Pokemon that you could catch and Mega Evolve before beating the game. And there's only 2 fights, I think, in the game where someone uses a Mega Evolution against you. And that's the champion fight with a Mega Gardevoir, and the fight with the bad guy, Lysander, his Mega Gyarados. There's a tutorial fight that I don't think you can lose, or it's very hard to lose, where you get a Mega Lucario and you fight a Mega Lucario, but that's a tutorial. That's not even a real fight. There's only like 2 fights in this game where an opponent will Mega Evolve against you. It also has like a crazy plot hole for Mega Evolution, and I know that's not a thing that people care about. Most people don't care about plot holes in Pokemon. But you start the game and you're tasked by the professor to figure out the mysteries of Mega Evolution. There is no mystery. By the time you get to the Mega Lucario tutorial, there's not only like a statue to Mega Evolution and like a gym leader who uses Mega Evolution to teach you how to use Mega Evolution. This doesn't seem to be a thing that people are like wondering about. It seems to be something that's like cooked and baked into Kalos. And the discover more about Mega Evolution plotline is completely dropped. No one talks about it ever again. It has nothing to do with the plot, really. So, between having a small number of Pokemon that could Mega Evolve, and an even smaller amount that could Mega Evolve before becoming champion, and the fact that there's only 2 fights where someone uses it against you, it feels like it was a cool idea that they put into the game, but it wasn't fleshed out. And that extends to everything X and Y. I don't feel like these are finished games. And I think this is a problem. I think this is an actual problem that Pokemon has. Because if I look at these bottom 2 tiers, these are generational games. Like, when it went to the Advanced, it was Ruby and Sapphire, and I don't feel like those are fully fleshed out games, especially compared to Emerald, which is just better. Diamond and Pearl are like poorly optimized, poorly made, poorly slow games with it's just very generic. And then here's Platinum, which elevated everything about it. X and Y is in the same situation where I'm like, it's not finished. There's whole storyline beats that are interesting. Like, there's a Pokemon... No. Here's one. Here's an even better one. AZ. AZ is like the king of Kalos from like thousands of years ago. And he created a weapon to end a war. And it was like a giant nuke that required the souls of thousands of Pokemon. He fired it. He ended the war. But as a side effect of firing the weapon, he became immortal, and he's been wandering the earth with like no possessions and left with grief over the amount of death he caused. He is a character with like 8 lines of dialogue. How do you introduce something like this? This is like not outside the realm of what a Pokemon game can do. It's not like too dark or anything compared to like we've already had like 2 genocidal maniacs, like, so it's not outside the realm. But how do you introduce someone like AZ and do nothing with him? Have no character with him, no meaningful interaction, no nothing. talks to the player in any meaningful way. And that's part of the finale. Lysander, the bad guy, a lot of people boil him down to he wants to destroy things that aren't pretty, but in a lot of ways he's like the MCU Thanos, where he wants to wipe out like all Pokemon, but also like most of the population. Like it's pure genocide, whereas like Cyrus in Platinum wanted to remake the world, and he was going to destroy this world to do it, and Getsis was going to become like king, and he was going to take over all the Pokemon and all that stuff. These are characters, or even Emerald, where they were going to like flood or like have volcanic eruptions, destroy parts of the world. They still wanted to rule something after. Lysander just wants to destroy everything except allow his cult to live, and they are a cult. Team Flare has more in common with a cult than any of the other game villains do. They even have like references to paying to become part of it, and they have to give them like thousands of dollars to do it, which feels very Scientology-like. He wants to wipe out a large percentage of the population so that their resources can be divided up better. That's Thanos, and it's before Thanos, and that can work, except it doesn't work with the whole pay me millions of dollars to become a member, and they take over like the Pokemon like ball facility, and it's a story that feels in rough sketches, or maybe it was even just a story that was made up because like different environmental artists had made different areas, and they're like, well, we have a power plant, so Team Flare takes it over. Well, why do they take it over? I don't know. We have this Pokeball factory that we want, and I guess the bad guy can take it over. Well, why do they want the Pokeballs? I don't know. And they just kind of strung everything together. The whole thing feels very sketched on and very unfinished. It is the most frustrating game to play because narratively there's some hooks that are good that are just not utilized. And if you want to talk about like rivals, what a step down from Black and White and Black and White 2 to there's like 4 rivals in this game, and none of them, I don't remember a single one of them. That's not true. I remember the dancing one. One of the guys likes to dance, and he's the most aggravating and annoying of all the 4. But remembering a guy because he's annoying doesn't seem to be like a worthwhile goal, you know? Guys, is there anything else to say about X and Y? I'll tell you what I like about X and Y, because I like all of these games, and I recognize that they're for kids, and I recognize that, you know, you shouldn't take any of this too seriously. They're friggin' Pokemon games. They're part of like a brand more than they are anything else. Something I liked about X and Y is that sometimes when I'm playing the games, I like to look at the regional Pokédex of what's available and pick out certain Pokemon I want to keep an eye on for or grab to build a team with. I did that for X and Y. I looked at the regional decks and I was like, ooh, I want this, 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 and this. And I had all of them by the 3rd gym. And I had all of them but one by the 2nd gym. That's incredible. I actually really appreciate how early you can get some really good mons that can stay with you the entirety of the game. That's not something you get a lot in these games. Like the pseudo-legendaries. Every generation has a pseudo-legendary, and for the most part, they're a post-game thing. They're not something you can get early enough to play the entire game with, and they tend to be very weak early on, and they tend to level up real slow. Like, they take a lot of XP to level up, and then they evolve like at really high levels, like 50s and stuff, before they evolve into their final form. They're not viable like that, you know, early on. I could get pseudo-legendaries in X and Y before the 3rd gym. I didn't. They weren't part of my team. The most OP thing I had on my team was Aegislash, which fundamentally breaks that game. That is a really overpowered Pokemon, and I did not realize how overpowered that was until I played X and Y. But I appreciate that in X and Y. I appreciate allowing people to play with Pokemon that they might actually like, and to develop like a a bond with some of the more powerful Pokemon that are in the game early on. It's something I really liked about Platinum, because as soon as you can get the bike in Platinum, you could get a Gibble, and Gibble evolves into Garchomp, which is, it might be my favorite pseudo-legendary just because I was able to play most of a game with it. I couldn't do that with any of the other pseudo-legendaries. Like, I've never played with a Salamence. I've fought plenty of Salamances. I've never played with one. You get them way too late. So, I enjoy the regional decks. I enjoy how much you can get out of it. I enjoyed the idea of Mega Evolution, even though it didn't really stick the landing on those. It's a game that really would have benefited from a third game, a second iteration on it that completed and fixed it. We really needed an Emerald or a Platinum for X and Y. It just didn't happen, and it didn't happen because we have Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, the, Ruby and Sapphire remakes. These launched as part of a anniversary for Pokemon. And to hit that anniversary, I feel like we lost a Pokemon Z, version that fixed X and Y. And I think X and Y are always going to be, if not the worst games for a lot of people, among the worst games, because it's just an unfinished game and it really needed that one more game, that actual polish, that extra year to fix it, to make it better. We got Oraz instead. And Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, I think, are A tier. That might be a bit controversial too. But like I've said before, I'm okay with story. I'm okay with Pokemon story. I realize that they're childish. I realize that they're campy and they're light. And I feel like Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire nailed the Ruby and Sapphire story in a way that even Emerald couldn't do. It made Team Magma and Team Aqua into these campy, over-the-top organizations. It made Archie and Maxie more distinct from one another instead of literally just palette swaps of one another. And the reason it gets so high isn't because of the villains or their plot. It's because of the rivals, Brendan and May and Wally. Brendan and May, like I had said before, in the original Gen 3 games, they just disappeared at a certain point in the game, never to be seen again. And Wally just appeared out of nowhere and expected me to remember who he was. They're full-on fleshed out characters in Oraz. Not only is Brendan and May given way more to do and way more dialogue, you kind of have this soft, subtle kind of romance between the protagonist and the rival. You even at the end of the game, you even go on a date with them to watch meteors and a rocket launch and all that stuff. It's really kind of sweet and understated. They're the girl or boy next door, and you went on an adventure together, and it's sweet. It's innocent, it's sweet, it's nice. Pokemon games, if I had to title what they are genre-wise other than adventure, it's a coming-to-age story, and I feel like Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire cover that coming-to-age thing much better than a lot of these other games do. Adding on top of this character development for that rival, there's Wally. Wally had a huge glow up. He went from a character that I barely remembered to a character that I actually felt really empathetic towards. It wasn't like I felt sorry for him. He was a very strong character who was physically weak and who was dealing with a sickness, maybe a long sickness, maybe a chronic sickness, but it doesn't stop him. He wants to become good, and he uses his rival with the player character to push himself to further heights. Again, it's very campy, it's very anime. I dig it. I make no apologies for that. I like corny stuff sometimes. That's why I like Pokemon. It's corny. I love all the rival work. The rival work alone makes it better than Emerald. and Ruby and Sapphire. But then there's the fact that it's also Hoenn. Like, it's a complete redo of Hoenn. And Hoenn, I didn't spend a lot of time talking about like the different regions and like their identities. When I talked about how Gen 3 kind of finalized the look of Pokemon, and it has like a really good look, I feel like that translated pretty okay to 3D in the Omega games, the Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. It's not perfect, and it's reusing a lot of assets from X and Y because it came out so quickly after X and Y. But I really enjoyed just the look, the feel, the movement across Hoenn. And I know Hoenn, a lot of it is ocean, and I know a lot of it is like too much water, put that meme up. Like, I get it, IGN, but... And I'm not here to like apologize for the water. There is actually too much water in Hoenn. But when I think of Hoenn, I don't think of the water. I think of the locations. I think of like the journey. I think about how every one of the cities felt unique. And when I spoke earlier about how Pokemon changed from like actual monsters to being more of like, this is like elemental things. These represent like nature itself. You have an entire town in Hoenn that is built into the trees, where Pokemon walk through their houses. They live one with nature in this town. That's cool to see in 3D. That's cool to see in 2D. That's just cool. Hoenn is a cool area with cool lore and cool Pokemon. And I feel like almost all of it was translated perfect. There's some stuff from Emerald I wish was there. I wish the Rayquaza part of the story was there. I wish they kept both evil teams as evil in the game. In fact, I wish there was no Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. I wish there was just like an Omega Emerald game. And I wish that we'd kept like each team having their own hideout. That's weird that they went back to Ruby and Sapphire and gave them the same hideout and just changed what NPCs are in the hideout. There's some weird step backs to Ruby and Sapphire because they adapted those instead of Emerald. It's just... While there's stuff I'm missing, and I know a lot of people are missing the Battle Tower, the Battle Frontier, which is like a huge reason why a lot of people love Emerald. I don't miss it so much. There's the Battle Tower, Frontiers, trees, and all that stuff in the games. I play them, I do them. They don't add enough to my enjoyment to like push things higher or lower. Because like my favorite end game stuff is actually story narrative stuff. I like Oraz because at the end of it you do the Delta episode or Delta whatever, where you have to stop Deoxys from crashing into the planet and destroying Hoenn. And you stop it by joining with Rayquaza and making Rayquaza like Mega Evolve. I mean, speaking of Mega Evolution, Oraz does so much of the heavy legwork to make sense of Mega Evolution. There was like a mystery to Mega Evolution in the beginning of X and Y, and it's dropped immediately. We get way more information on what is Mega Evolution, where did it come from. They established that the Mega Evolution timeline, these games take place in a different universe or a different timeline than the mainline games. Almost everything lore-wise for Mega Evolution is actually in these two games. Yeah, it's bizarre how unfinished X and Y is. So I don't miss everything from Emerald enough to like put it lower than Emerald. I think it is better than Emerald, even though there's stuff from Emerald that I would have loved to have seen, and I wouldn't have complained if the Battle Frontier was in Oraz. And I feel bad for the people that the Battle Frontier was that important to them and to their enjoyment of Emerald, and having it not in these games, that's a betrayal. It takes so little effort to just bring over 7 battle facilities. Just they should have done it. They should have had the different, like, Emerald content in the game. I think the sum of the parts, though, it's better. These are better games than even Emerald. That's just my thought. Here's where I'm going to get some kind of hate. Because the Sun and Moon games, I don't think they're well received by fans. I know they weren't really well received back when they came out, because around this time was when Pokemon Go came out. And Pokemon Go changed Pokemon. It kind of revitalized the whole franchise. It's what got me back into it. I went from Gen 2, played Gen 1, never played another game again. And then Pokemon Go happened, and I played Pokemon Go like everyone else did that summer. And if you wanted to then jump into a Pokemon game after playing Pokemon Go, it was Sun and Moon that was available. And Sun and Moon might not be the best Pokemon game for someone coming back to the series after Gen 1 or Gen 2. That said, like I said before, I'm kind of a sucker for the stories. And, yeah. I'm going to put all 4 of them in A tier. I know that's bold. I know that's very bold. But I'm going to stand by it because I like the story for Sun and Moon. I know there's for 90% of the game, Sun and Moon and Ultra Sun and Moon are the exact same story. They only really change the story in the finale. And there we go. And that's why I'm going to lump them all together, just like I lumped all of the Gen 1 games. There's differences, and there's fights and balance changes. I think overall, the Ultra games are better than the Sun and Moon games. And if you were going to play just one of these, I would say do the Ultra one, because it has like better mini games, it has better balancing, the totem Pokemon are better. It's a lot of it's just better. I feel like the post game is also better. Like, I like story post game. The post game for Ultra Moon is you get to fight all of the antagonists of the series together as they come across this there's this multiversal Team Rocket that's going like universe to universe and taking over, and they have all of the bad guys from the series. It's a lot of fun. And there's some really tough, challenging fights. And yeah, I'm going to lump them all together. The differences in story, I don't think, I mean, like, Sun and Moon have like a better villain story. I think Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon have a better Pokemon story. So, I mean, let's get into it. Let's get into why it's so high. Number 1, regional Pokemon. Regional Pokemon is like, you can tell by like X and Y, maybe it's time to slow down how many Pokemon there are. I think at this time we're like approaching 700, 800 Pokemon. You just couldn't keep adding 150 Pokemon every generation. I think the lowest they ever added was like 70 Pokemon, which I think was X and Y. This Gen 7, they added a few more Pokemon, not many. But the regional Pokemon kind of took over that, you know? They had like a Dugtrio, but with hair. They had the Geodude Graveler line, except they had little pieces of like electrode pieces on them, and also hair. They added hair to a few Pokemon. Raichu could surf on his tail, and he was a psychic type. I think the best ones were Marowak, who is a ghost like fire dancer. That's such a cool design. And the Execute, Alolan Execute, as a grass dragon who looks like an actual palm tree and not like whatever Execute kind of looked like, which was kind of a coconut palm tree thing, but I mean, you gotta squint. There's some really good designs, and the idea of regional Pokemon is a gimmick that I think has more legs in it than a lot of the gimmicks people think about, and I think that's why it's also hung around so long since. So yeah, regional Pokemon are like a big thing. The next thing is like they changed how the formula of a Pokemon game is, because from Gen 1, Pokemon kind of had a formula, and it did not want to ever break from it. There was 8 gyms and an Elite Four, and once you beat all of them, you became champion or you fought a champion, and ended the game. The Sun and Moon games, they're designed... I tried to explain this to a friend, and I think this is the best way to describe it. They feel like Zelda games more than like Pokemon games. Like, there's an emphasis on story. There's a much bigger emphasis on story in Sun and Moon than there is on any other generation. Gen 7 is very wordy. That's a thing that a lot of people use as a negative to it a lot. They're like, it takes 2 hours to get through the tutorial. And I'm like, yeah, it's not Red and Blue, which took like 15 minutes and you're out and going. And I can appreciate people wanting to return to that kind of play, but I'm used to this now being a series that has a story. And it's had a story since like Gen 3, and it's had a good story more or less since Gen 4. So it's not just like wordy and story based that makes it feel like a Zelda game. To me, it's the fact that they got rid of gyms, and they got rid of like that structure for the game. Instead, there's 4 islands. Each island has a kahuna. The kahuna is like the boss fight for like a temple in a Zelda game. When you get to a temple in a Zelda game, you have to collect keys, you have to defeat enemies, and you have to like solve puzzles. These are the exact same things you do on any one of the islands in Alola. You arrive on the island, you have to do like some kind of box pushing mini game or wiring electricity through charge-a-bugs, like as a challenge, and you have enemies to fight. You have totem Pokemon, which is for the first in the series boss fights with actual Pokemon. They're bigger, they're stronger, they have passives that increase their stats even higher than they already are. And they can call in reinforcements, and the reinforcements are actually really good, especially in the Ultra games. I haven't really talked about like combat, but certain games have like real good like ideas behind them. Sun and Moon, Ultra Sun and Moon, they have like, one of them, for example, is a Komodo fight, which is a dragon fighting type, which means it's 4 times weak to fairy. And you're like, oh, I'll bring a fairy type to go beat this totem Pokemon. It'll call in a Scizor, which has priority technician boosted bullet punches. And that could actually wreck your fairy type. And that kind of thought, that kind of coverage, is not really something you saw a lot of prior to this generation. There were examples. Let me show you. I think Winona from Emerald, she had a pretty good team. Let's see. Yeah. Let's talk about this. If you want to see a difference, here's Ruby and Sapphire, her team. Here's Emerald, her team. Like, it's a much better game. All right, so like, look, Winona I'm going to use as an example because like she has a normal flying, a grass flying, a water flying, a steel flying, and a dragon flying. Like, if you brought in a electric type to go take out all of this, you'll do really well against like her Pelipper. You'll do okay against like her Swablu. But you're probably going to have a bit of trouble with like her Dragon, which resists electricity and has Earthquake. That is a hard counter. And if you wanted to bring a rock to go a fight like these, like you want to bring out, Graveler or something, you'll do fine against some of these, but then here's Tropius with his Solar Beam. This is like a fun way to do them, because all gyms are monotype, and this is like a real fun monotype where things have like counters to what you would bring to it. I feel like another one was was in Black and White. the electric gym, Alessa, I think her name was. She has like 2 Emoljas who can volt switch and are immune to ground attacks because they're part flying, and then a Zebstrika who could hit you with like fire and increase its speed. I love. I didn't talk about combat much, but the combat in the Sun and Moon games, because of the addition of boss fights, is actually much more complicated. It took everything from what came before, and it made it funner just by giving you big bosses. And there's no bigger boss than the Ultra Sun and Moon fight with Ultra Necrozma. That is such a cool idea, to give us an actual final boss with like incredibly OP stats and abilities. Like, yeah, you can cheese him. Yeah, if you know he's coming, you can plan for him. But it's fun to have boss fights. This was one of the things that Sun and Moon did that I feel like, as far as like gameplay goes, really should have kept going as the series went on. But it's kind of stuck in Sun and Moon. I don't know what else to say about Sun and Moon. I love them. I love them. I think they're good games. I don't think they're as good as Black and White, which there we go. Let's say that. I think Black and White 2 is better than Emerald. I think I like Oras more than Black and White 2. Except maybe I don't. It gets complicated. It gets complicated up here at this level. And I think Sun and Moon fit pretty well in this. I really enjoy that. Yeah, and you know what? I'm gonna bump Black and White up here. You know what? Yeah. I'm gonna leave it here now. Black and White 1 and 2 are also S tier. And then this feels better. These are better. Yeah, this feels better. I still think Sun and Moon is better than Emerald. I'm sorry, Emerald. I love you, Emerald. I love you. Next is the Let's Go games. The Let's Go games are probably the first games people were playing after Pokemon Go. And it seems to be built because of the popularity of Pokemon Go, because the catching mechanics are very similar to playing Pokemon Go, except with Joy-Cons and motion controls. I know the entire series is made primarily for kids, and this seems to be made for the even bigger kids or smaller kids than the rest of the series. It's very simple. It simplified the combat to the point that it's not enjoyable to anyone who likes the combat in a Pokemon game. The art design is actually amazing. It's some of the better art design we've had. I really enjoy like the Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire and the Sun and Moon games for their artistic designs and just aesthetics. And I still think, even though this is our 5th time to Kanto, the Let's Go games are even prettier. In fact, I'll maybe put them ahead of Ruby and Sapphire. I know that's probably blasphemous to people. And in fact, I'm sorry again, guys. There's gonna be some controversy, I think, on this one. I think X and Y is better than Sapphire and Ruby. So yeah, I think that's right. These games are for kids. They're for the tiniest of kids. They're pretty. They did some things right. The ride Pokemon are done, like from Sun and Moon, are done even better in Let's Go games. The animations are great. Like everything outside of the gameplay is good. I don't think they're even better than the original games, though. Like, as far as, like, gameplay. Because, yeah, these are very simple. They're very, very kiddie. There's a 2-player mode, which there's no real 2-player mode for any of these other games. It's not well done, because someone just drops out of the sky and walks around with the other player, and they can't do much. But it's there. It's for the audience it's aiming at, which is, like, 5-year-olds. it's probably the best Pokemon game for them. It's like the perfect introduction to the series for like a kid. But if you are over 10 years old, or if you've ever played any other Pokemon game, there's really nothing here for you, which is why I'm going to put it in D, but it's the top of D because the art design is so good. It aimed at a target demographic, and I think it nailed that target demographic. And I think it was really trying to do a crossover to try to bring people into the Pokemon games from Pokemon Go. And while the Sun and Moon games were going during Pokemon Go, I don't think there was a lot there to draw people back into the series, whereas literally going to Kanto with the first 150 Pokemon again, that, with the catching mechanics of Pokemon Go, like, come on. It had a specific target, it had a specific goal. I think it nailed its target and its goal. It's just not for me. And I can respect it while also saying it's really not for me. Sword and Shield, Gen 8. I'm gonna talk about some of the things that Gen 8 did really well. It streamlined a lot of stuff. I think its UI is one of the better UIs the series has had. Breeding Pokemon became not only so much easier, but more transparent. In fact, transparency is like a big thing in Gen 8. You can see stats, you can see IVs, you can see EVs. You couldn't really see these things, at least easily, for a long time. So there was some super training in ORAS and X and Y, where you can see some of the EVs that you were training up, but it wasn't like something you could see and track and measure. And admittedly, in Pokemon Sword and Shield, you had to beat the game first before you could see these stats, but you could probably beat the story for Sword and Shield in like maybe an afternoon if you really didn't care. It's really short, it's really simple. The game itself it's not as easy as X and Y. Like, I didn't talk really about like difficulty for Pokemon games, and in general, Pokemon games are not difficult. Most, if not all of these games, I think all of these games, you can beat with just like an overpowered starter and just never switch off of your starter Pokemon. But they're not hard. You can beat them real quick. You can get to some of these transparency things fairly quickly. I'm gonna put them in B, and that also might be controversial because I don't think these are well-regarded games either. I like Dynamax, and this is where I'm going to be blasphemous again. A lot of blasphemy in this video. I like Dynamax more than Mega Evolution. I don't think Mega Evolution was ever like fully fleshed out. Even though it's done better in ORAS, it's still something that, while there's more Pokemon that can do it, you don't fight many of them that do. I think you still fight like 3 Pokemon. It's like, how did you do that again from X and Y? That's not true with Dynamaxing and Gigantamaxing. You fight multiple enemies, including every major boss fight and gym leader. They have a Gigantamax or a Dynamaxed Pokemon that you fight. I like that it's not for every battle, because you shouldn't need Mega Evolution for every battle. Like, it's kind of funny the first time you Mega Evolve. Like, I played what was it? I played Alpha Sapphire, and I got the Primal Reversion Kyogre. And that's a fun Pokemon to just go up to like a Rattata and just primal reversion into like this primal Kyogre and just destroy this small like level 5 Pokemon. Like, there's funny bits when you do some of these like gimmicks against any and everybody. You couldn't Dynamax anywhere. You had to Dynamax usually in a stadium. It was part of like a big fight because there was places of power that people could do this at. So there was a narrative reason for why you couldn't do it all the time, and you shouldn't need to use it all the time anyway. It's a very powerful thing to do. It was fun to do. I liked the look of it. I liked how it made the gym fights feel special. I like the feel of Galar and the gyms being like a soccer stadium. Like, with people cheering and dude, I love so much about that stuff. Why is it so low? I mean, it's kind of middle of the road, and it's kind of middle of the road because, yeah, it's easy, and yeah, it's linear, and yeah, you can beat it real quick, but also the story is just bad. It's bad in a way that the story for these games has not been in a long time. The actual bad guy, Chairman Rose, his plan is not only nonsensical, kind of like early gen bad guys. It's hilariously dumb. It's not just nonsensical though. It's hilariously dumb. He's going to like destroy the world because in 1,000 years there's not going to be enough energy. There's no rush, buddy. Why are you destroying the world? It's on accident that he's destroying the world, but when you're calling Cthulhu to give you ultimate energy, you should expect Cthulhu to destroy the world. Yeah, the story is bad. The story is actually just bad. And as a story guy, I have to say it's not good. It's up here this high because quality of life improvements, the gameplay's fun, the Wildlands, which was our first like open world Pokemon bit, was fun. You were able to see Pokemon in the open world walking around. They didn't have a whole lot of animation, but man, that's so much better than random encounters. And yeah, like there's a lot to love. I think competitive Pokemon, this was an era where competitive Pokemon was really fun to watch. And I feel like Dynamaxing was a little bit more balanced because it's still OP. Like the point of like the Mega Evolutions and Z moves and Dynamaxing, it's supposed to be OP. It's supposed to be fun and OP. But this was one that you could build around. You can stall out. You can switch up. You can put to sleep. You know, like there were things you could do against Dynamax, and there was things you can do with Dynamax, especially like controlling terrain and weather. I thought it was all fun. It's easy. It's a very easy game, but again, most of these games are stupid easy. Yeah, it's as high as it is, and that might be controversial to people, but I stand by it. They're fun, very mid games. I think that's exactly where they belong. Yeah, I think that's exactly where they belong. This one's fun. Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. They are mainline Pokemon games, and they're the first ones that were not developed by Game Freak. They like farmed out like who was going to make this, and I think they used their own engine. No, I think they used the Unreal Engine, and these are faithful remakes of Diamond and Pearl. That's right, just like last time with Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire being remakes of Ruby and Sapphire, and not the better Emerald. They did the same thing here, and they're only slightly better than the originals. And that also might be a bad take, because I know a lot of people, or a hot take, because I know a lot of people hate Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. I don't hate it. I think that there is improvements made. I do like the Grand Underground better than the original Underground. I like being able to get like a fire Pokemon, which is a weakness of all of these games. Like all of the Gen 4 games, much earlier because of the Grand Underground and being able to catch like a Houndoom. I like the connectivity with Wi-Fi, which I know these games came with Wi-Fi back in the day, but it's on the DS, and that's not great anymore. This is on the Switch. It's modern, so you can still like Wonder Trade with people that are still playing the game, and there's small quality of life improvements like that, but there's also things that made it worse. Being a faithful remake of two games that were not the best of that gen, and there's such a gulf between like what is good about that gen and what is bad about that gen. It's bizarre to me that they didn't bring over stuff from Platinum. And okay, look, Pokemon have had since X and Y an experience share that can affect everybody. In X and Y and the Ultra Sun and Sun and Moon games, that could be turned off. In Sword and Shield, it could not be turned off, and in keeping with Sword and Shield, it can't be turned off in Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. Sinnoh is not made with that XP share in mind, especially when you're just going to copy and paste encounters and tables for encounters and fights. You over-level every single gem in this game without trying. And you could constantly switch out Pokemon to stay a little bit more competitively low level, but that kind of goes and spits in the face of like everything else in the series, which is about building bonds with your Pokemon and you're going on an adventure with friends, you know? So in fact, I don't think one's better or worse. I think they're the friggin' same. And that is, I wouldn't play them and I wouldn't recommend them to people unless there was no way for you to play Platinum. You should play Platinum if you wanted to play anything in Sinnoh. Yeah, there's no reason for such a faithful remake. None of the other games were that faithful with their remakes. And for it to have been Diamond and Pearl that they were this faithful to, that everything about this was a mistake. They're the same. They're the exact same game, even with some small quality of life improvements and some small like mess ups by like having like the XP share. They're the same. What's not the same is Pokemon Legends Arceus, which goes right up there in S tier. It shoots right up there with Black and White and Platinum. Pokemon Legends Arceus, in a lot of ways, is kinda the Game Freak remake for Gen 4. And I'm going to explain that just a little bit. Because, okay, Legends Arceus takes place in Sinnoh, like Platinum and the Diamond and Pearl games do. However, it takes place like hundreds of years into the past, because your protagonist from modern day gets thrown into the past because anime. And when you arrive in the past, God challenges you to catch all the Pokemon. Okay, I'm in. The opening is a touch slow as it like introduces you to Hisui, which is what Sinnoh was called back in the day. Hisui apparently means jade. So if we were keeping to like Pokemon naming like conventions, instead of it being Pokemon Legends Arceus, it probably would have been called Pokemon Jade or Pokemon Hisui. And that would fit well with Platinum and Diamond and Pearl. You go on an adventure collecting Pokemon that are very similar because it's in the same region as the ones in here. You create or help build up Jubilife City, which is like the major city in these games. You meet a bunch of ancestors to characters from these games and some from Gen 5 and like Gen 2. You go on an adventure that's remarkably similar because it deals with like the same chain. It deals with Dialga and Palkia. It deals with Giratina. It deals with a enemy that wants to destroy the world and create some other world, which is just like Cyrus, but it's not Cyrus. And of course, even the finale where you fight the big bad guy, his team is an almost one-to-one recreation of Cynthia's team from the Gen 4 games. Like, it feels like a remake that took a lot of inspiration and just went off in its own direction. And that feels more like the remakes, you know? Like, Fire Red and Leaf Green, it tells a more traditional story than the original games, which just kind of like threw you out there, and it like built up the side characters a little bit more. Same thing with like the Heart Gold and Soul Silver games, and especially with the Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire games, which takes place in an entirely different universe. The Delta episode even has it to where when Deoxys is going to hit the Earth, the protagonist group was going to send that into probably the universe that that like Emerald and Ruby and Sapphire took place in, and just let them take the hit to save their own world. And that didn't work well with our protagonist and another character who was like, no, we're going to save all worlds. We're not going to sacrifice one world to save ours. Like, that's what they do. Like, especially like the Let's Go games. Let's Go games, they are like, especially Yellow, but like, they're not, because you don't play Red and Blue. They're actual characters in that. It takes place like years after what would have been Red and Blue. Like, I don't know. Game Freak doesn't like doing just faithful remakes like these games did. Like, you know, the Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl games did. I feel like this is their take on Sinnoh, on Gen 4, and modernizing it and making it not open world, because it's not open world. It has open world elements. There's like I think 4 or 5 like large maps that you can explore and catch Pokemon in, and they changed up how the combat works. They changed up how catching works. They changed almost everything. I'm counting it as a mainline game because it is made by Game Freak, and I think it's spiritually, if not factually, the remake to Gen 4 that we were looking for, which is sad because, yeah, I did want to kind of play Gen 4 again, but good God, this is a good game. So they're not on this list, like for me to put up here. But that brings us to Scarlet and Violet. And if I had to rank Scarlet and Violet right now, before DLC and before any patches, like major patches, I would still put it right above Oraz. It would be right up here in A tier, right before them, right underneath Legends Arceus. And that's probably my last like hot take, because it's the last game as of this recording. And I know people are going to be upset about that, because people don't like how unfinished it is. They don't like how buggy it is. They don't like how we've heard nothing from Game Freak on like when they're going to fix things, how they're going to fix things. There's no transparency from Game Freak on fixing stuff. And the game is very poorly optimized for the Switch, to the point that I believe the conspiracy theory that it was supposed to launch on a follow-up console and not the Switch, because I just don't think the Switch can actually handle the game. And even if it could handle it, it's really just poorly optimized for it. I don't know. There's a lot technically wrong with Scarlet and Violet. So why is it so high? Well, it's so high because I love the story. I love the story, but I also love the gameplay. The gameplay of having an open world Pokemon and it being a traditional Pokemon game, not like Legends Arceus, which has like a completely different like way to fight. There's like agile and strong styles, and they simplified all of the buffs and like buffing moves, like buff most everything instead of just one specific thing. And you know, statuses changed. In like, there's no like sleep in Legends Arceus. It makes people sleepy, which gives them a chance to not move. Like there's a lot of change there. I like it. I think it's not polished well. I think there's more to do with Pokemon Legends Arceus's combat. And I think they know that too, which is why there's so little combat in Arceus. It's much more of a collecting game than it is like a trainer battling game. Oh, and Legends Arceus also brought back boss fights from Sun and Moon. Like, dude, I love Arceus. But Scarlet and Violet, it's a traditional Pokemon experience in an open world, which is the first time we've had. Like, we had a bit of it in Sword and Shield. We had a bit of it in Arceus. And that's fun. It's never not going to be fun. The stuff that really pushed it over the edge for me, though, is the fact that there's 4 stories. There's the gym challenge story, which is their bare standard, like, defeat 8 gym leaders in an Elite Four and you win. There's no, like, reveals. There's no, like, story implications. That's it. You mostly fight your rival Pneumonia in that bit, and that's fun. I like it. It's great. Then there's Arven, and his sick puppy, and that has you going around fighting big Titan-like Pokemon. That's also fun. I like that. That also had like one of the tougher boss fights when you have to fight Arven at the end of that. That boy built a pretty good team. I'm not gonna lie. Then there's the evil team, Team Star. Like, since Sun and Moon, evil teams have like not really been evil, not fully evil, and Sword and Shield they're not evil at all. They're just goofballs. The kids in Team Star are not evil. They are victims of bullying who stood up for themselves, and their followers are kids that are idolizing this and are waiting for their leaders to come back. That's actually not terribly nuanced or anything. It's just a nice, like, change of pace. You always have to have an evil team in these games. Most of them hit. Some of them don't hit. I feel like Team Star hits. That story was also fun because you got to walk around with the professor who was hiding who he was, like his identity from you, and trying to figure out like what was happening with these kids and why they were all like delinquents, and it wrapped up real nice, sweet, simple. And then the fourth one was the actual, like, if I'm considering the plot, it's you're three rivals and you go to like this land before time area, and you have to go fight like this evil parent to Arven and all of their paradox Pokemon that are going to be a threat to the region and maybe the world as like they spill out of this land before time. This place is called Area Zero. That really worked for me. The story worked. It was simple. It was sentimental. The characters were fun. It was the same thing like with Black and White, where I'm talking about like the rivals have like character arcs. The character arcs are there in Scarlet and Violet. It's not as pronounced for like for some of them. Like Pneumonia doesn't really change at all. But yeah, I'm a sucker. I'm a sucker for that kind of stuff. I'm a sucker for Friendship is Magic. I'm a sucker for Scarlet and Violet. I think it's one of the better Pokemon games. Looking at the list, like Platinum, the Black and White games, Legends Arceus, I would recommend these every day of the week to anyone who's interested in checking out a Pokemon game. I think all of them offer the best the series has to offer. Platinum is like the definitive like early 2D game, I think. Like right now, that is, I think, the best Pokemon game ever made. I think Black and White is Pokemon like being super ambitious and telling the best story it can. Black and White 2 is that, but better, only with worse story. And Arceus is maybe the future of the series. I wouldn't be terribly upset if that's like, if more games take more from Arceus than like the other games, but it's really good. It's really fucking good. Then we have Sword and Shield. No, then we have Scarlet and Violet, Oras, the Sun and Moon games, and Emerald. That feels right for me for A. Those are really good games. If you like these games, check out any of these. You'll love them. The B tier, that's average. These are the average Pokemon games to me. Like, and then everything under that is below average. I would recommend checking out X and Y. Out of all of these, if you liked all of the other Pokemon games and you just need another Pokemon game, I think X and Y is fun in a way that these other games around it are not. But it's still super, super simple. And yeah, I'm actually gonna pop. No, look, I like X and Y. I'm not someone who hates X and Y. It's got so much potential. It had more potential than Sun and Moon. It had more potential than Sword and Shield. It had so much potential. And it's just unfinished. It needed more time to cook. It really did. Even more so than Scarlet and Violet. Scarlet and Violet's another game that needed more time to cook. but if it had finished cooking, it would have been better than Platinum. It would have been the best game the series has ever made. X and Y with more time to cook was probably going to land somewhere in the A, you know? So yeah, that's my list. That's probably controversial. It's probably going to have a lot of disagreements. Well, you can obviously tell me yours if you disagree, because I can see some of these even moving. It's not like I had this plan. This is all like stream of conscious, and I think overall I'm okay with this list where it is. This feels pretty all right. So yeah, what's your favorite game in the Pokemon series? What game do you not like? I obviously just do not like any Sinnoh game that is not Platinum or Arceus. Well, leave a comment but down below. That's the video.